The main thing is to get the meaning behind this. You know, it's
Exactly.
what it says here is the universe according to Buddhist cosmology. You know, the ground anointed with perfume and strewn with flowers. That's not how we see our world, is it? And then I certainly haven't got Mount Meru in the middle. So never mind. But if you know that one, do it. Visualize that. Otherwise, just visualize all the marvelous things of the world that make people happy. We pile them all up and offer to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. That's the meaning.
Yes, great. So let's start together. Saju Peki Jukshin Metok Tramri Rablingji Nidegye Padi Sangye Jindu Mite Ulwa Hidrokunamdak Jin La Chupashok. And the following part we will recite together in English. Perfect, pure, holy gurus from the billowing clouds of wisdom and compassion in the sky of the Dharmakaya, please let fall a rain of profound and extensive Dharma upon the receptacle of those to be subdued exactly as they need. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniyatayami.
All right. So the next one, as always, we do our little motivation. We think reminding ourselves of our reliance on the Buddha. And then second, reminding ourselves that we're listening so that the long-term view, so that we can finally perfect ourselves by practicing so that we can help others. Sangye charang soke chok nam la jancho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chanyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drumpa shok. Sangye charang soke chok nam la jancho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chanyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drumpa shok. Sangye charang soke chok nam la Jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chanyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye pasho. So now let's recite the Heart Sutra, and I will say the words, and you can join in, you know, wherever you are. But if you just want to listen and contemplate the meaning, that's fine too. So we imagine that we're on Vulture Peak with Lord Buddha. And if you've been to Vulture Peak, you know it's a very small spot. It's near Rajgir. And it's way up and high, quite high. It takes you about 20 minutes to walk up there. In those days, you had to stumble up, but these days they've got nice steps. And then we're sitting there, and it's many Lord Buddha's teachings were given there. So what we're visualizing is there he is sitting in meditation. Actually, he's not looking like he's speaking, and this is one way that he often gave teachings. Apparently, he would meditate, and then he would channel his thoughts into the minds and mouths of his disciples. In this case, you know, Avalokitesvara is a 10th level bodhisattva, which means looking like a human. And then Shariputra, and then they have this conversation. Shariputra asks Avalokitesvara a question, and then the rest of it is Avalokitesvara giving the answer. And also it's spoken from the point of view of a yogi in concentration on emptiness, which is why it says that within emptiness, there is no this and no that, etc. So, and then it says at the top, as we know at the top, it says, with a great host, with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. Well, if you've been there, you know it's a very small place, and it's not possible for a great host of anybody to be there. So I asked Geshe Dagpa, I always remember this, I asked Geshe Dagpa, our wonderful Lama in San Francisco, where they all sat. And he said, oh, what do you think? In the sky. So you can be sitting down on the ground or in the sky, whichever you prefer, okay, as we recite. Or you contemplate the meaning as I recite. It's up to you. I prostrate to the noble, rare, sublime ones. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on Masa Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokitesvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokitesvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. All the way up. Yeah. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no objective touch, and no phenomenon. There is no eye element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the 3 times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared: Ta ta om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagawan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagawan. Okay, good. So I think we covered the first 4 perfections, did we not, somebody?
Yes.
Good, okay. So we just summarize the whole path. So these 6 perfections are the final stages in this course to Buddhahood of the great bodhisattvas. But first, so before you get to, the higher stages of the university level, you've got to go to the lower parts of the university level, which is where you've achieved bodhicitta. But that is on the basis of having been in high school, which is where you achieve renunciation based upon working on your mind, understanding the Buddhist model of the mind, deconstructing and unpacking and unraveling all the chaos in here, and doing the crucial job of distinguishing between the neuroses and the virtues, and then within that, the crucial job of learning to go against the neuroses, arguing with them, deconstructing these nonsense conceptual stories, stopping these disturbing emotions, particularly attachment. And then on the basis of having done that, you've been in the first parts of junior school, which is, this is junior school. The first parts of junior school are where you abide by the laws of karma, where you control your body and speech, because you can't control your mind if you can't control your body and speech. So you achieve renunciation, which is junior school, which is the wisdom, junior school and high school, which is the wisdom wing. and this is for you're the beneficiary of all that. Then you get to university and you achieve bodhicitta. Then the final stage is you then get to do the 6 perfections. And we've done the first 4 of those, the accomplishment of generosity, morality, patience, and perseverance in relation to sentient beings. This is the job of a bodhisattva, from life after life after life after life, with their long-term view, no matter how many lifetimes it takes. They're on this goal, they're on this path, the goal of which is their Buddhahood. And what they're doing from life to life is 2 things. One, on the basis of this bodhicitta and renunciation, they're connecting with countless numbers of sentient beings, eyeball to eyeball, one at a time, helping them, benefiting each one according to their capacity. But making a karmic connection is the crucial part. And then when they're ready, 47 lives later, they'll meet again. And because they've got that karmic connection, they will drag them to enlightenment. So the essence of a bodhicitta is 2 things. One is they've made this paradigm shift that now only others are in the center of their mind. Their own self is finished. They don't worry about that. They haven't realized emptiness yet, but they've got this incredible aspiration to only be a benefit to others, for others in the forefront of their mind every second. And secondly, their long-term goal is, on the basis of this connecting with sentient beings life after life after life, helping them life after life after life, they're practicing the first before perfections. They're perfecting the perfection of generosity, the perfection of morality, the perfection of patience, the perfection of perseverance. And then in their meditation, they perfect the last 2, which we'll talk about today. And then they become a Buddha. But if they're on this Mahayana path in Tibet, they'll whiz off into a postgraduate and they'll leap into Tantra and whiz quickly, based on the brilliant technology of Tantra. As Lama says, Tantra is highly technical. They'll then become a Buddha very quickly. And why? Because they've got this immense compassion. So the quicker the better. Not the quicker the better for their own sake. The quicker the better, because they can't bear the thought of all these suffering sentient beings. You know? Okay. Excuse me. Okay. So the next 2 are what you do in your meditation. So the 5th one is called calm abiding, and the 6th one is called special insight. In Sanskrit, that's shamatha and vipassana. And each of them is the term used to refer to the end result of these practices, you know. So calm abiding, shamatha, is the accomplishment of this extraordinarily subtle level of your mind with super focus, to levels of focus that we can use ordinary English words when we describe this, but we have no equivalent in neuroscience and no equivalent in modern psychology. So the best we can do is try and imagine it, because we don't have anything like this. The words are simple, but what they're referring to is states of mind that we do not posit as possible in modern psychology, for the simplest reason that shamatha is a state of mind at a subtler level that doesn't depend upon the brain, that is beyond conceptuality and beyond the sensory. Well, like I said, we don't posit such a state. So that's why we think it's mystical. Well, it's not mystical. This is Buddhist psychology, and this was invented by the Hindus before the Buddha. It's not even a Buddhist technique. It's amazing geniuses before him, who are the ones, as His Holiness says, whom I always quote, who began the investigation of the nature of self, 3,000 years ago. And where they did this investigation was in their own mind, internally, subjectively, in the cognitive process itself. This is something, again, we do not have in our modern culture. We only talk about the brain, you know, and there's brilliant science about the brain, no doubt. But Buddha's expertise is not the brain. It's the internal, experiential, cognitive process itself. So concentration, you know, you read about in the Lam Rim, there's extensive literature about it, but essentially, as I said, it's not even a Buddhist teaching, it's just technically Hindu, and it's not Mahayana in its character. So here we are in the Mahayana component of the path, which is where it's taught, but it's not actually a Mahayana teaching at all. It's actually a Theravadan teaching, as well as not even being Buddhist, because if you are on the Hinayana path, if you're on the Theravadan path, and Theravadan is one of the only remaining 8 of the 18 sub-schools of Buddhist tenets. There's no longer, there's all the others are no longer existing. There's many, when you study Buddhist tenets, you know, you study all the different levels of the different levels of Buddha's interpretation of the path in particular, and each of them differs slightly. There are many, many, many differences. There are various levels of the Hinayana path. I mean, for example, Theravada is one of the 18 sub-schools of the, what's it called? Satantrika, I think. The Vipassana and Satantrika. And I think Vipassana, Theravada is one of the 18, the only one remaining of those 18 of different variations of views there. One of those, I'm a bit vague, I'm sorry, I've forgotten my studies. Then you've got the Mahayana, and that's divided into the Chittamatra and the Madhyamika, and then the Madhyamika is divided into 2 different levels, and that's divided again. So there are all these, it's a really clear text. It's laid out very precisely, presenting the differences in Buddha's teachings, the different interpretations, which is brilliant, because Buddha taught many things, many kinds of minds, you know. So the key factor, the key piece where he diverged from the Hindus, the key piece where he differs, and the key piece that are different interpretations in these Buddhist views, is the view about how things exist ultimately, finally, emptiness, selflessness. So here, what we're describing is the description is the view of emptiness according to the Mahayana, and within that the Madhyamika, and within that the Madhyamika Prasangika, which means the middle way consequentialist view. It's a particular approach. Consequentialist is referring to a whole approach, Prasangika in Sanskrit, and it's implying a particular approach to the way you use logic to deconstruct ego's misconceptions. And the marvelous quality of the Prasangika view, the Prasangika approach, not the view, the approach to using logic to deconstruct ego's misconceptions in order to realize emptiness, is that you know, when you're debating, you're using the other person's position. You point out to the other person, you're debating, and you point out to the other person the illogical consequences of their position. And it's a very skillful way to help the person themselves come to the conclusion of their mistake. You don't bully them into pointing out the mistake. You point out the illogical consequences of the mistake, of the position they just asserted. So it's a very skillful, psychologically, a very skillful way of getting a person to realize their own mistakes. It's very interesting. But here, broadly, the Prasangika or the consequences is referring to a school of thought, a subdivision of the Madhyamika, which is a subdivision of the Mahayana, which is a subdivision of Buddha's views altogether. Okay. But concentration, so in order, okay, if you're on the Theravadan path, which is the first junior school and high school, wisdom wing. Then if you want to graduate at the middle scope, if you want to graduate at high school, you do all exactly the same stages that we went through. Karma, abide by the laws of karma, control your body, control your speech, live in vows, do purification, go to high school, get some shamatha, you'd get renunciation, then you'd learn about emptiness, and then eventually in one life or another, you would realize emptiness. And then eventually in one life or another, you'd achieve nirvana. And then in that life, after that life, you won't come back. And I think we might have pointed this out. I can't remember, but I'll do it again. Think of how you'd be, if we can imagine this, think of how you'd be if you had rid the mind of all delusions. No longer a skerrick. And I think it's a very odd English word. We say it in Australia. Not a skerrick, not a tiny atom left of attachment, aversion, and the other 83,997 neuroses that Buddha has pointed out. And nor, of course, crucially, is there not even a scrap of any ego grasping, ignorance, maripa, self-grasping, the view deep in our bones that is what keeps us forever cycling in cyclic existence until we cut it. And what cuts it is the realization of the reality that it has never been, isn't, and there could never be that kind of I, which we're going to talk about. So when you realize that on the Theravadan path, and you've become a Hinayana Arhat, you've destroyed the root enemy, the delusions. You can try and imagine what you'd be like. There'd be no attachment, no aversion, none of the nonsense left, be no delusions left. There's no longer a separate, there's no longer this sense of an intrinsic me. You're fearless, you're blissful, you're joyful, you've got clairvoyance. You can't imagine the qualities of this person. You'd have bucket loads of love and compassion. How could you not? Because that's what's left in your mind. But this is the distinction between the love and compassion of where you're at there and the love and compassion of the Bodhisattva path. The unique characteristic of the Bodhisattva path, the whole Bodhisattva path can be summarized as compassion. All the virtuous qualities can be all subsumed into compassion. So compassion is defined as this thought, starts with a thought, May you not suffer. You see someone suffering and you go, oh my God, look at that suffering. That's unbearable, you know? That's compassion. So that will be stupendously big. That will be enormous for this person who's achieved liberation, a Hinayana Arhat. Of course it would be. You've got no delusions left. There's just incredible empathy when you see suffering, and incredible love, and all the other virtues are all there. Of course they are. But the unique characteristic of the Bodhisattva path is called great compassion. It's one extra step above. Not only do you see suffering, go, oh my God, look at that suffering, it's unbearable. You go, and this is the point, you go, what can I do to fix it? It's like His Holiness used to call it universal responsibility. It's this very powerful, which you have to cultivate it. It won't come naturally. You have to cultivate it. It's the unique characteristic of the Bodhisattva compassion. It's the one that says it's my job. It's the job description of a Bodhisattva. Their job description is like a mother. A mother never for 1 second will forget it's her job. She'll see her baby falling out of the cot on the floor crying. She'll have compassion like you can't believe, but she's not looking around wondering who's going to save her baby. It's her job. She knows it. It's her job description. Think about it. That's a Bodhisattva. But the whole entire universe are the children of the Bodhisattva. So it's their job. You cultivate that. It doesn't come easily. Great compassion. And sometimes you hear Lama Zopa says the special attitude. I'm a bit confused whether that means also great compassion. It's a technical term. But it's this extra level, extra powerful one. It's my job. I must be, if I don't do it, who will? This brave attitude of the Bodhisattvas, this fearless compassion of the Bodhisattvas, great compassion, Mahakaruna. It's not just a nice feeling, it's a technical term. Excuse me. So if you're on the first stages, if you're on the first part of the path, the Theravadan path, the Hinayana path, life after life after life, your motivation, your goal, motivation just means your goal. Your goal is you got to get the hell out of samsara. It's a garbage dump and you're sick of suffering. You've got renunciation. You're fed up with suffering and you know you've got to realize emptiness to cut the root and eventually you achieve nirvana and you're out of here, baby, and you're not coming back. So that's your goal. So your motivation is that. So when eventually you go through all these stages, you get rid of delusions, you get rid of all the ego grasping, you got incredible compassion and you perfect those realizations, and in one life or other, you've achieved your own nirvana. And you got bliss, you got compassion, bliss, all these incredible qualities. But then because of your motivation from life after life, when you get to the time of death, your bliss and your goal, your motivation override your compassion and you don't come back. But if you're on the Mahayana path, your goal is Buddhahood. So you put life after life after life, your goal is not just to graduate at nirvana, your own nirvana, you're going to graduate at Buddhahood because you've now got this great compassion. So even if you have the same realizations and at some point you don't need to come back, you've rid the mind of ego grasping and perfected that realization, let's say, to some degree, and you don't need to come back. I don't know which level that would be. I'm sorry, I'm a bit vague. But when you die, your motivation overrides your bliss and you come back again and again. Your compassion for others, it's my job. So it's a massive difference. That level of compassion is stupendous. Great compassion. It's my job. What can I do? That's the characteristic of the Bodhisattva. That's the point. So that's what we're describing here. So both concentration. So concentration is the Hindu technique and is taught if you're on the Theravadan path, it's taught in high school. And emptiness is also a Theravadan teaching. You have to realize it to achieve your own nirvana. So of course it's a Theravadan teaching, but it's taught here. The two of them are taught here. They're left from there and they're taught at the end of the Mahayana path. Now I did read somewhere that Tsongkhapa said, and I think it makes a real lot of sense, that on the Mahayana path to Buddhahood, it's left until then, until you've got bodhicitta. Because the bliss of your own mind that you achieve even just with shamatha is so stupendous, we can't even believe it. In Lama Yeshe, in his book Mahamudra, he tries to describe it to us because he wants to get us excited. We say the word bliss, you say the word rapture, you say the word ecstasy. I mean, excuse me, who's ever experienced those? I haven't. So we can just pretend, you know. Now, if you've had not to be too gross, but if you had the best, most handsome boyfriend in the universe, you might have had 1 minute of it. Then it's gone down the toilet. When you wake up in the morning, where was the rapture? You're tired again. So I'm sorry, we can't sustain it. But this is what Lama is so blunt about when he describes some of the qualities we would accomplish with just getting shamatha, which is made up by these Hindus. The mind is, this is the point about, he's trying to encourage us, because this is the nature of our mind. When it's unencumbered, even temporarily, from delusions, when delusions even temporarily are ceased, the mind is just naturally joyful. This is hard to imagine, you know. I remember when I interviewed Venerable Rene, our wonderful Swiss monk. Have you ever invited him to Zurich, Nina?
Yes, Venerable.
Has he been?
Yes, he has been a few times in the summer.
so
I think 2 to 3 times. Yes.
Amazing. Okay, well, I interviewed him in 1995 in Mandala magazine about probably one of his first retreats. Since he first met the Lamas, you know, as soon as he met the Lamas in the 70s, you know, about the same time as me, I think, and he immediately had the karma, he immediately wanted to become a meditator. So he became a monk, he studied, and then he just had this goal. So he's been a professional meditator for like 30, 40 years. It's incredible. 40, I'd say, easily. So the thing is, I interviewed him in 95 in Mandala about his 2.5-year retreat, one of his retreats, getting single-pointed concentration, which we're going to describe. And it's described in terms of 9 stages in the text, you know. So he was telling me about, and he was at Ursaling, this lovely, up in the mountains, this center blessed by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and named by His Holiness, the place of clear light, Ursaling, in 1982. His Holiness blessed it and said it reminded him of Tibet, so beautiful, perfect for meditation, up in the Sierra Nevada, beyond, out of Granada. So he was there for 2.5 years. So anyway, he told me that, he said, different things he told me, which are crucial to understanding single point of concentration. One thing he said to me, this relation to what I'm saying just now about this bliss. He said very humbly, you know, he said, there's no question. He got to about the 5th of the 9 stages. He said he just touched upon the 5th of these 9 stages. And he said, there was something like this. There was no question that the joy his mind experienced in meditation, right there in his own mind, in concentration, was so superior to any joy he'd ever experienced through his senses. Now, we check when we say joy, we mean our senses. Think about it. I don't think many of us have such a clear, brilliant mind of bodhicitta and a mind of love and compassion without delusions that would mean that you'd be joyful all the time. I mean, you hear Lama Zopa, you hear His Holiness Dalai Lama, it is clear they are joyful all the time. This is a simple technical term, people. They have, because they've rid their minds of delusions, not only that, they have accomplished insane levels of love and compassion and bodhicitta. So then their mind, that just naturally causes, and this is the point about Buddhist psychology, it's so clear, that having those predominate in your mind, you've got compassion, yes, you're in tears when you see compassion, but you do not suffer. It's not possible to suffer. Suffer doesn't come from crying from compassion. Compassion is a powerful state of mind, but they've got joy. They are joyful. I mean, Lama Zopa, when he had a stroke in 2011, and the people took him to the hospital. He had a stroke. He was sick. He was joyful, laughing all the time. We can't get that, you know. So when there's no delusions, you are only joyful. There's no choice. When you've got no delusions, you can only be joyful. There is no choice. It's quite specific in Buddhist psychology. So there's Venerable Rene in concentration to some degree, the 5th of the 9 stages. There was no question, because he's gone to some degree beyond his conceptuality, beyond his sensory. He's accessed his subtle level of cognition, which is asleep for most of us 100% of the time. He'd kind of woken it up, if you like. His mind was joyful. And also, this was interesting, it was peaceful. When we think of joy, think about it. Even a delicious piece of cake that will trigger the pleasure. It's like excited. It's all agitated. I don't want to be too gross, but think of the best pleasure you could ever have with the best boyfriend in the universe. Talk about not peaceful. It's the opposite to peaceful. Think about it, because it's sensory. These are technical points, not moralistic. In other words, the only when we learned back in high school, the only way we know how to access our capacity for pleasure, joy, happiness, these words are synonymous. We think happiness is out there because we're so addicted to believing it's the boyfriend or the cake that triggers the pleasure. We really misunderstand. We're so convinced it's the outside. When we think of suffering, we're so convinced it's the outside. And when you say to me, tell me about your suffering, Robina, I will tell you the boyfriend and what the bad things he did to me. Tell me about your happiness, Robina. I'll describe the boyfriend and the good things he did to me. Because we are so caught up in the external object, we think the pleasure we experience, which is mental and sensory, it's my own mind, but we think it's external. We're really off the planet, you know, without misunderstanding. So with shamatha, Lama Yeshe describes it in Mahamudra. The mind is just utterly, as Lama says, rapture. You experience rapture, ecstasy, bliss. I mean, these words sound almost like sins. They sound so ridiculous, don't they? Because this is the natural state of our mind. To the degree that your mind is unencumbered by delusions. And this, you learn this in high school. So concentration is incredible. But that's just a bonus. The point is, and this is what I'm getting at here, concentration, shamatha and vipassana, both Hinayana teachings, are not taught until the end of the Mahayana path, because the danger back in the earlier stages, when you're mainly focusing on getting renunciation, you get renunciation of samsara, but you get the bliss, so you can then get the mind, you get the mind to a subtle level, and that's when you get bliss. That bliss is so powerful, so delicious, so seductive, that you could easily forget about bodhicitta, and you won't even want to bother going to the Mahayana path. It's like a danger, and it makes complete sense. For example, never mind that, okay, never mind that. So it's taught in the Mahayana. It was my main point here. So concentration, calm abiding. It's a method. It's a level of single point. There's another word in Sanskrit, samadhi, and I'm a bit confused about the different levels of samadhi, I think. So calm abiding is one of those levels. I'm a bit confused, so don't get me too literal here. I'm sorry. I forget. But calm abiding is the name of this technique, and it's the name of the goal that you accomplish having gotten this level of single point of concentration. Now, the point is here, the bliss is just a bonus. It's just a bonus, that's all. But because you're on the Mahayana path here, and you get it, you're never in danger of forgetting about sentient beings. Never. The bliss is manageable for you. You can handle it. It won't get you all overexcited. So you won't forget about sentient beings. So the bliss is a bonus. The point of single point of concentration is not the bliss. It's simply a byproduct, which is still delicious to know about. As Lama says, if you really understood the extraordinary quality of your own mind, you wouldn't even want to sleep. You'd be so happy to try and accomplish it. But the purpose of concentration is simply one, only one, is to get the mind to this laser-like level of focus, that's all. And why do you want level of focus? Why do you want a laser-like level of focus? Why do you want to get single point of concentration? Because you're trying to unpack and unravel the utter, insane, demented, eons old chaos in here. Our mind is made up of millions of thoughts. This is a big surprise to us. We learned this in high school. We call them emotions because they're the thoughts we've practiced so often that they also involve our body. And because we're so oriented towards our body, because we're so gross and believe this is me, we only notice any of our thoughts when they become emotional, which is when the body is involved. Because we're so addicted to our body, we make the body the boss, as Lama Yeshe says, you know. But single point of concentration has got nothing to do with the body. It's beyond the body, and it's beyond the grosser level of our mental consciousness, which is conceptuality. So it's a very different state of mind. So we need that because we are trying to unpack and unravel the chaos in here in order to get crystal clear about how things exist ultimately, thus realizing that there never has been, isn't, and never could be the fantasy I that we've clung to for eons, which is the root of all suffering, of all sentient beings. So it's a practical thing. So calm abiding is described in terms of, as I said, 9 stages. And we'll just go through briefly here because I want to talk about emptiness mostly. So okay, let me say a bit more about the mind. This is in high school. We would have learned this in high school. we've got in our mind, there are these millions of thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious. We're trying to unpack and unravel all of them, have this incredible, amazing, brilliant control over all of them, this brilliant awareness of all of our mind, which is what we're capable of when we've got single point of concentration. So they're divided into neurotic, deluded, ridiculous states of mind that lead us up garden paths. Then there's the positive, reasonable, valid states of mind. And then the third lot, I like to call them the mechanics of our mind, because they are crucial parts of our mind, without which we'd be insane, without which we'd have Alzheimer's, without which we wouldn't be able to do anything. They're called good memory. That's the word the world knows is mindfulness, which people have put a lot of bells and whistles onto in the West and called it different things. But in the Buddhist view, it's referring to a once very specific state of mind that's an ability to not forget what you're doing moment by moment. That's the meaning of mindfulness. Some of the lamas even call it memory. It's basically short-term memory. You know, if you can't remember what you're doing moment by moment when you're making a cake, you'd be insane. You would never be able to hold the information long enough to make a cake, would you? That's mindfulness, and that's absolutely vital to have that. Then you've got one called alertness, which is Holiness calls like a policeman, was kind of watching, making sure all the bits do their job, because mind is made up of many bits. So we forget the negative and the positive ones, leave those aside, and we're looking at the mechanics here. And these are some of these are what are developed to an incredible degree of brilliance in concentration meditation. So there's the very first one. There's one called intention, one called attention, discrimination, feeling. That's another whole discussion. It's not why we use that word. Discrimination, alertness, concentration. There's many of these pieces, and in concentration meditation, you're honing all of these. And just like if I say I am holding a cup, I am holding a cup, it's true. Which part of me? My hand. And then you analyze the different parts of your hand. Well, the little finger does this, and the ring finger does this, and the middle finger does that. They've all got their job, haven't they, to hold the cup. Well, the same with your mind. We say, I am meditating. Yep, you are. Which bit of you? It's not your body, baby, it's your mind. Which bit of your mind? It's not love, it's not compassion, it's the technical bits, the mechanical bits, the intention. You intend to do it, and then you pay attention. And attention is what does the looking, but that's completely pathetic at the moment. There's no mindfulness, there's no concentration, there's no alertness, so you're all over the place. You can't focus for more than a second. So you've got to develop the mindfulness first, develop the alertness, develop all these different qualities that enable you to then pay effortless attention to whatever you want to pay attention to for as long as you like, baby, at a subtle level. That's what you're trying to do. It's quite technical. It's quite technical, and it needs much effort and much enthusiasm and much work. As Venerable Rene told me in the interview, he said there was no way in the world he would have been qualified to go to the mountains, you know, that relatively speaking it was, the Sierra Nevada, and sit there for 2.5 years, all day, every day, attempting to get this concentration, unless he had become a monk, taken vows, done masses of purification, listened to lots of teachings, and even taught. All of that was his preparation. We can't just walk away today and go to the mountains. Look at yourself. We can't even sit here for half an hour and try and concentrate on our mind, on our something. We'd go bonkers. We're full of jobs and just things and worries and fears and need to sleep and eat and go to the toilet. So you can't even imagine the mental, just the level that Renee did it to. And then you think of holy beings like Geshe Lama Kontrog, who went off into the mountains after he left Tibet and disappeared for 7 years until they found him again, in a cave in the wall, a hole in the cave and the wall, in the mountain, 6 foot of snow in the winter, naked, no food, no sleep, no clothes. He had such power over his mind. He was a great tantric yogi. He lived in Vajrayogini's Pure Land. Lama Zopa said, you can't even conceive of the effort. I mean, it's -2 degrees out there now for me in Santa Fe. I've got a toasty, warm house. The moment I walk out just to put my rubbish bin out, you feel the chill. And I can think of Geshe Lama Kontrog in 2 meters of snow in a hole in the mountain, meditating and in bliss, and he's able to generate heat in his body. He doesn't need clothes. He doesn't need food. He doesn't need sleep. I mean, talk about advanced. Think of the effort. So even just Venerable Rene, when he had a little house and comfort and food and sleep, the effort he has to have made to harness this berserk, uncontrolled mind of ours. So don't think that meditation is, to feel nice. What a joke. Eventually you're going to feel really nice. But the work to get there, oh my God. Such determination, such effort, such perseverance, you know. And Buddha says we've had concentration in countless lifetimes. We've lost it because we've never used it to realize emptiness. So so the main obstacles in the mind that are preventing our mind from being single-pointed there are two, simply two, called, they refer to it as the capacity of the mind to be overexcited. That's attachment energy, and you learn about attachment way back in high school. It's got multiple functions, but essentially we all know it. It's the mind out of control, and that for us in our culture is the most normal state of our mind. We just think that's normal, don't we? The mind is out of control. You can't control, even if your mind is fairly quiet and you're not being very angry or very attached, we know the mind is out of control. These seemingly random thoughts, 1,000 a second, even Western psychology says, are just coming and going. We just think, oh, that's normal. That's a normal, crazy, ordinary mind. But this is like mental illness for the Buddha. We can control and harness that utterly and effortlessly and completely and perfectly. It's like inconceivable. It's like science fiction for us, you know. So the first tendency of the mind is this berserk. It's called, simply it's called excitement. It's a very polite word for it. Berserk is better for us, I think. The other tendency we all know is the tendency for the mind to be dull and spaced out. So when you sit down to meditate, even for 5 minutes, we know you either go berserk and can't stop thinking, or you practically go to sleep. So these are called excitement and dullness. And all the way through these stages, it's this gradual process of becoming intimately familiar with these two dangers and adjusting your mind from being too excited and from being too dull. And this excitement and dullness at each stage gets ever more subtle, ever more subtle, ever more subtle, ever more subtle. In fact, at a certain point, this subtle dullness is actually, people can think it's concentration. Even at a gross level, many people can sit down and close their eyes in meditation posture and feel extremely comfortable. I'm the opposite. I can't even sit for 3 minutes without going berserk, you know. So, but if you've got this tendency to be comfortable because your mind is like that, you think it's called meditation. That's the biggest mistake in the West that people make. Because we're so addicted to our bodies, we're so addicted to our physical experiences, that we're so junkies to want a good feeling. And if you close your eyes and you watch your breath and your mind becomes peaceful, which is lovely, and then you feel good, that's for us the criterion of success. That is not the criterion of success. And it's the greatest danger, because it's just dullness. It's just, you become an idiot. It's just stupidity, you know. But it feels nice. And that we're addicted to feeling good. This is our problem with meditation, you know. So anyway, it's described in terms of these 9 stages, really quite subtle. You can read Pabonka Rinpoche's description, it just sounds very technical, you know. You read Lama Yeshe, you get excited because he tells you how it would feel, some of the qualities. I mean, you'd have, for example, when you finally achieve this, you've got your mind is utterly clear and blissful, as if you can count, as Lama Zopa says, Lama Yeshe says in your meditation, it's as if you can count every atom in the universe. Your mind is so crystal clear. Your mind is so vast, it's as if you encompass the universe. Your mind is so blissful, rapture, ecstasy, you can't believe it, but you're totally peaceful, not greedy and grasping. And you have clairvoyance. This is something completely natural in Buddhist psychology, coming from these Hindus. That because we've got these subtle levels of cognition that don't depend upon the brain, that are not conceptual, are not sensory, then this subtler level of mind literally can cognize subtler phenomena, such as the past, the future, the minds of others. That's when you'll prove karma and reincarnation to yourself. If you really want to do that, it'll take you a couple of years to get this single point of concentration. So you've got extraordinary qualities, you know. And as Buddha says, you really can't begin to benefit sentient beings until you've got clairvoyance, which is the ability to see the past of that person, so you know exactly the karma they have, so you know exactly how to benefit them. It's incredible wisdom, unbelievable wisdom. But the point here of getting this concentration in this context here is so that you can then go to the second mode of meditation and achieve special insight. Well, let's not fantasize those words. In English, it's a very good word, insight. In some languages, it's a weird word. It's very arcane, and so people romanticize it or mystify it, you know. But insight's a very good word. When you're thinking through a problem in your daily life, you say, oh, I got a bit of insight into that problem. You mean you understood it. It's experiential. It's a really good word, insight. So here, Lord Buddha taught many insight meditations. So the first thing you would do in a typical session using these two modes of meditation, you would get some concentration first using your breath or using whatever you focus on. In the Tibetan tradition, we often focus on a visualization of the Buddha. Or if you're doing Mahamudra, you're focusing on the clarity of your own mind. So to the degree you get some concentration, you then, in your session, then you go to the second mode. So in general, in the Buddha's teachings, what we're trying to get insight into is all the Buddha's teachings. That's pretty obvious. So a typical session, if you've just say you've just gone to a class and you've learned about karma. So basically you go to home, the teacher will say, go home and do your homework if we're Western people. If they're not, if your Tibetan teacher says, they say, go home and do your concentration meditation and then go to the second mode of meditation and do some analysis. So that'll trigger an insight. That's what they'd say to you. And we mystify that. But basically it's your homework. When you go to school and you learn 1 + 1 is 2, you have to write down that concept. Otherwise you'll forget it. It's brand new information to you. You're 5 years old. You've never heard of it. So she'll say to you, go home and do your homework, Robina. So what you'll do, if you're an ordinary little person with you go home, and if you have a desk, Mummy's been kind enough to give you a desk. You go to your desk, you better be disciplined. You got to say, I'm going to do my homework now. You go to your desk and you sit down. So you know perfectly well that if your brothers and sisters are running around shouting at you, or if all the big noise is on or the television is on, you won't be able to concentrate, will you? You can't do your homework. It's pretty obvious. So it's obvious you need a spot where you can close the door, be at your desk, and you can get your mind focused. That's called the first mode of meditation, concentration, except we don't call it that. We just call it, you got to get some focus. Your mum says, now get focused, Robina, get your mind focused on your homework. So you've got your concentration first. And that's what you then use to go to the second mode of meditation, when now you do your quote unquote homework. And what will you do? You will take the information, open up your class book, and there it is written all the numbers and the pluses and the minuses, and you don't understand it yet because it's a concept you've never heard. So what do you have to do? You have to think about it. That's the method you're going to use. And when you think it through, at some point you'll go, oh, I get it. Now you understand that 1 + 1 is 2. That's called an insight. It's nothing complicated. That's an insight. You just understood it. It went from your head to your heart. So what was the method you used? First, you got some concentration. But then in the second mode of meditation, the Tibetans will call it analytical meditation. But that's a fancy term. Analysis is a fancy word for the verb to think about. It's a Greek word or something, isn't it? Instead of whatever the think comes from. I don't know what culture that came from. So analysis simply means to think about something. But we think about something means 1 + 1 is 2, 1 + 1 is 2, 1 + 1 is 2, hoping the penny will drop. That's idiocy. You use your noggin, you use your intelligence, and you get the information. That means you have to know the meaning of 1. You have to know the meaning of plus. You have to know the meaning of 2. You have to know the meaning of equals. You have to have conceptually understand those different components. And then in your analysis or your thinking, you think it through. And slowly, because you're concentrated, the meaning will come to your mind. And that's called an insight. Now think about it. Is this not how we have learned everything since we were born? You've got to focus on that information. Otherwise, if you can't concentrate, you'll never put the information together because you can't keep your mind long enough on the thing. It's obvious. So concentration is a practical issue. And it happens to be these genius Hindus invented this ingenious ability to get such concentration you can't imagine it. But even to the degree you have any concentration, you then use that in the second mode. So just the same, you've been to your class, you've heard about karma, you'd go home, you'd sit on your cushion, you'd get your concentration for 5 minutes to the degree that you've got it. Then you'll take your concentration and go to the second mode, and you will then concentrate on the clear thinking of, well, karma is this, and therefore this, and because of this, and she said this, and therefore this, and you look in your book, it means this. And so and that's how you do your homework. Every day, that's how you learn everything. How do you learn languages? How do you learn music? You do exactly this. So do not mystify these two kinds of meditation, please. But we do. Even the word meditation is a big shock to us when we hear the term in Tibetan is the verb gom, to meditate. In English, it translates as the verb to familiarize. to become familiar with. Wow, so it's a disappointment. We think meditation is some mystical trip, you know. No, it's fantasy. You familiarize your mind with it. That's how you learn 1 + 1 is 2. You familiarize your mind with that new language. That's how you learn it. You familiarize your mind with music, but you've got to have concentration first, otherwise you won't remember it. So concentration is practical. And then the second mode is where you do the work to get the insight. But the method you use to get insight is analysis. And the same here. What we're trying to get here is special insight. Here, specifically in the 6th perfection, it is insight into emptiness. That's the topic here. So any questions before we move on into concentration? And before we move on into emptiness? Any questions, please? No.
Yes, Robina.
Yeah, go. Tell me.
Talia, but Christian posed a question. It's quite clear to me, so I'm just going to read it out. So if there is... Robina, I can't hear you. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
So the question from Christian is, so if there is a risk that we will forget about Bodhisattva path, should we still practice shamatha even as beginners?
Of course you should, but you know, if you're going to be such a good practitioner that you're going to get to the subtle level of mind and experience rapture and ecstasy every day, then I'm happy for you. I'm happy for you, baby. So of course you must practice it, but you know, don't hold your breath to get that ecstasy and rapture. And this is the trouble in the West. We are so greedy for happiness. We're so greedy for pleasure. If we do get it, we'll just seek. We will, even ordinary people will forget about everything else. So of course there's a danger. So you have to know where you're at and know the reasons. And if you get renunciation and realize that's why in the high school level where you get renunciation and see how revolting attachment is and the delusions, then you won't forget it because you'll know the suffering is disgusting. It won't be enough for you. So you just have to be wise, that's all. You must practice it, yes.
Yes.
Good.
Thank you very much. That's so far the only question we have.
Yeah, that's fine. Any other questions? Please, people. If not, I'll go into emptiness. Okay, I'll go.
Okay, I don't see any hands, so
that's fine. Thank you, Talia. Okay, good. Ready to go? Okay. So the thing is, concentration. I just touched. Okay. There are 2 main obstacles: excitement and dullness. And the entire 9 stages is the gradual lessening of these 2 and the intricacy with which you do this and the skill and the brilliance with which you do this, you know. So I won't go further into this. I've told you the Lama says it's very marvelous, and so you can read Mahamudra to find out how delicious it'll be. And then we need it. So the second mode, we're going to use the concentration to whatever degree you've got it. If you've got the first level of concentration, you'd use that level of concentration. You've got the 6th level, 9th level, whatever it is, you use that one. You keep growing the concentration, get more and more precise. Okay, so now there are hundreds of reasons, hundreds of logical reasons we need to use to deconstruct and argue with this primordially deep misconception, the deepest misconception, the source of all the suffering. So this is where the Buddha diverged from the Hindus. He's amazing. And I can only say Hindus because I don't have enough wisdom to know all the different schools of thought. There are so many schools of philosophy among those amazing Indians. I just don't know them. So he diverged from and they were so amazing already. They'd given up. They'd understood the causes of all the suffering of the lower realms. They understood the suffering of suffering. They'd understood the suffering to a degree, the suffering of change. And they even got to what they call the formless realm, which is a state of mind where you're so absorbed, so subtle, you haven't even got any kind of other aggregates other than the mind. And that for them is the peak of liberation. But that's where Buddha said, no, they haven't uprooted the root delusion yet. The root delusion is there. They're still seeing things as intrinsic, seeing things as permanent, as uncaused, as unchanging. And he says they are mistakes. That's where he diverged in his own direction. That's how come we have so-called Buddhism, you know. So the crucial differences are in relation to this particular position about how things exist. So this is the point about differing about how things exist. In other words, he's discussing the very ontological status itself of everything that exists. And he says, this is the one we have to do finally. And all the work we've done so far is leading us, is preparing our minds, priming our minds to get to this point. So the words are this. The Buddha says the ultimate nature, this is so abstract for us when we hear the words, it's like a joke, you know. The ultimate, the way that everything exists finally, ultimate and final, they're the same meaning. The way that everything exists finally, actually, ultimately, is that they lack an intrinsic nature. Now, I mean, that sounds so boring, doesn't it? You want to go to sleep. Huh? We'll say, what are you talking about, mate? You know? So we've got to unpack that. Now, the very interesting point is this. If someone tells you, points to, you know, if you point to my thermos and you say, Robina, the actual character of that color there is that it lacks being green. Now, it's an odd way to put it, isn't it? But you've got to ask the question, why would I point out to a person that that is empty of being green, that lacks the characteristic of being green? Buddha's telling us that everything exists, everything that exists lacks the characteristic of intrinsic existence. He's telling us that. So why are you telling us that, Buddha? Well, Robina, why are you telling me that cup lacks the characteristic of green? It's obvious, isn't it? Because you believe it's green. Why would he wouldn't say that to a person who doesn't know, who doesn't think it's green. That'd be stupid. He's saying, basically what Buddha's saying when he says the way that everything exists ultimately is that it lacks inherent existence. Another simple way of putting that is, Robina, don't be stupid. Nothing has any inherent existence. It's not inherently existent. What are you talking about? So it's like someone saying to me in a more simple way, instead of saying it in a fancy way, that cup lacks being green. All he's saying to me is, Robina, that's not green. So why would he tell me it's not green? Because I think it's green. Think about this. Think about this. If you know already it's not green, I wouldn't be stupid and point it out to you. But the person who, you know, if I think that's green, Buddha comes along and says, Robina, that cup lacks greenness. I'm sorry. That cup is empty of being green, honey. It's a fancy way of saying, Robina, you idiot, it ain't green. He's saying, you people, all you idiots in samsara, nothing, everything, you know, everything is not intrinsically existent. And what's an affirmative way of saying that is he's saying, Robina, everything's interdependent, honey. Everything's a dependent arising. That's an affirmative way of saying it lacks inherent existence. So clearly, the first step we have to do is understand the meaning just intellectually of these words. Otherwise, we're in great trouble, you know. We have to understand the words. Just get their head around the concepts. Because if someone says that's not green, and you don't even know the meaning of green, you can listen to those words for 42,000 years. It won't help you. You've got to know the definition of green. Then you've got your eyes fixed, you know. So we have to know that what is the meaning of inherent existence, and what is the meaning of dependent arising? What is the meaning of interdependent? Because saying everything is interdependent and saying that nothing has an intrinsic nature, no one would ever think they mean the same thing until you learn it. You've got to learn these concepts, you know. They don't appear from the sky. So that's why we have to squeeze our brains. So you have to learn the meaning of things. And that's why all the work we've done so far, first of all, understanding karma, the law of cause and effect, at the very beginning, junior school, the implicit teaching there is to control your body and speech so you don't create future suffering for yourself. The explicit. But the implicit meaning there is actually it's an example. Karma is an example of the first level of dependent arising, that I am the product of past causes. And by learning that, this implicit meaning, it helps me understand, oh, therefore there is no intrinsic I. So the very first level of dependent arising is that I am the product of causes. So that's junior school. Second level of practice, high school, where I learn about the disturbing emotions, and the main function of these emotions, their disturbingness, is what I've got to think about in order to want to get rid of them. But implicit in there at that level of practice is seeing that these disturbing emotions are misconceptions. This is more subtle. They're misleading me. They're liars. So that is implicit. Now we get to get bodhicitta. Now we get to the six perfections. Now we get to emptiness, and we have prepared our minds. All that past work has prepared our minds for being more easily able now to get our heads around this point. So Tsongkhapa, our lineage lama, he's written this wonderful kind of poetic text in praise of Buddha for his teachings on dependent arising. Because as Lama Yeshe paraphrases Tsongkhapa, and paraphrasing the Buddha, is that dependent arising is the king of logics to prove this ultimate way that things exist. So the conventional truth of dependent arising is the king of logics to prove the ultimate truth of emptiness. So we first learn the words. We make it complicated. You know, someone says, oh, I've been thinking about emptiness for 50 years and I still don't understand it. And I say to them, well, give me the definition. Oh, no, I can't do that. Well, if you can't even define, it's like saying, I've been thinking about 1 + 1 is 2 for 50 years, but you don't even know what 1 means, or 2, or equals, or plus. Then you're just being stupid. We've got to use our noggin. It's not, we mystify it because we can't understand it. We think it's mystical. No, it's a mistake. It's understandable. Just got to work hard, that's all. Okay, so let's look at emptiness, the term, the shorthand for the way things exist, finally, in relation to the way things exist conventionally, as dependent arisings, as interdependent phenomena. So these are the two truths, as Buddha would call them. But right now, when we hear the word emptiness, we fall into the abyss of the great mistake, as Tsongkhapa says, and we hear nihilism, we hear nothingness. That's the wrong view. And then when we hear that things do exist as dependent arisings, which is the other truth, we then over-exaggerate and we grasp at it and see it as permanent and intrinsic, and we hold on to it. So these are the two extreme views. When we hear emptiness, we hear nothingness. When we hear dependent arising, we hear somethingness. And they're both extreme. They're both exaggerated. They're both embellishments. And this is what's hard to get to see. But this is what we have to see, because the reality is the two truths are pointing to each other. And eventually, when we've achieved the middle way, the final middle way, when you become a Buddha, the dependent arising and emptiness are cognized by you simultaneously. So in other words, another way of putting this, they're flip sides of the same coin. They're synonyms. They're another way of saying the same thing. We have to learn to put our minds into that. And as Chandrakirti says, and as Nagarjuna says, and as Buddha says, whatever, when we begin to put these two together, we're on the right track. If we're seeing them as separate, we are disaster, in the wrong direction completely. And this is the commonest mistake on the planet, it seems, apparently, in the misunderstanding of emptiness and dependent arising. Okay. First point. So now, according to Buddha, this is fairly evident, the universe consists of trillions and trillions and trillions of phenomena. It's pretty clear. And the word phenomenon, the word object of knowledge, the word existent, the word established base, there are at least 5 synonyms for that which exists. And this is absolutely vital, because what Buddha is trying to get us to see is exactly how everything exists in its actual nature. And why does he want us to do this? Not just to be clever and pass our philosophy exam. No, because this misconception about how things exist is why we suffer. And this is a pretty abstract concept to us. We would not think that. We think we suffer because of our boyfriend, you know. No, we think we suffer, Buddha says, because of misconceptions in our mind. This is his exact point. Buddhism is a method for getting happy and stopping suffering. Buddhism is a method of good ethics. Buddhism is absolutely a method of stopping ignorance and getting wisdom. And the method to get happy is to get wisdom. That's it. Because why? Because the extent to which our mind is layered, full of these layers and layers and layers and layers of misconceptions. The branch delusions, which we learn about in high school, attachment, anger, jealousy, and all the rubbish, they're the branch delusions. The extent to which our minds are caught up in those, and in the root delusion, which informs those, which is known, and I'm going to describe it, known simply as maripa in Tibetan, ignorance, known colloquially when it's clinging to this me as ego grasping, the extent to which we're caught up in these misconceptions is the extent to which we suffer for the Buddha. So this is the method for stopping suffering. The method to get happy, the method to stop suffering is to get wisdom, to see how things exist. That's it. This is not necessarily what we would ever think in the world. It sounds very, very bizarre. And I like to point this out because in our culture, we are geniuses. We've got the best mathematicians, the best musicians, the best genius physicists, unbelievable genius, brilliant minds. There's no question. But what good is that wisdom when you can go home and beat up your husband and your children? Because it has got nothing to do with happiness and it's got nothing to do with ethics. Meaning that like kind of wisdom it's got nothing to do with the wisdom that Buddha's talking about. Don't mystify this. Okay, so everything that exists in the universe, every object of knowledge, every existent, every phenomenon, every established base, if we are misconceiving them, we better first establish what, ultimately, we better first establish what they are conventionally, get at least tick the boxes and get at least the right definition. So we're all on the same page. That's called conventional wisdom. It's reasonable. If I say to you, I have a black thermos in my left hand, you know perfectly well that's a truth, a conventional truth. If I say I have an elephant in my left hand, you'll feel sorry for me because that's not a conventional truth. So we've got to get things at least conventionally clear first. Then we can start to do the analysis and break down the misconceptions that cause us to not get to see the actual ontological status of this thing. That's not just the job of the fancy philosophers up in the top parts of the university. No, this is the job of everybody. If you want to get rid of suffering, if you want to achieve liberation, you've got to have this wisdom. So, okay. As I said, Buddha diverged from the previous views in relation to his views about how things exist ultimately. And so he's got different levels of views about dependent arising. There's 3 levels he talks about. There's thousands of ways. This word dependent or relation in Buddhism is a massively important thing. That we've got different, when you study it in depth, there's many ways that things have a relationship, many ways that things exist dependently. Relationship and dependence there's different ways of dependence. Relationship is a type of dependence. There's other ways of being dependent. It's quite precise. These words are defined very, very precisely, and there's very levels of all of these, okay? So dependent arising, things exist or in relation to each other. Things exist in relation to certain things. So this I, we're going to discuss the phenomenon called I, okay? So the word I, me, self, person, they're all synonymous. A dog is a person, a Buddha is a person, a hell being, Buddha would assert, is a person. A human is a person. We're all I, me, myself, person, synonymous. So we need to define our terms. I always use a simple example of what's that, mummy? Oh, darling, it's a thermos. So she'll give me the definition. She has to explain the meaning. Well, the first part of the definition at least tells you the conventional characteristics so I can recognize it. A flat-bottomed metal container. I can get that. But I don't know the meaning. And this is a crucial piece. To know the meaning of something, to know the function of something, to know the job of something is a crucial thing to understand in order to understand ultimate reality. I have to know the meaning of this. What is it, mummy? What does it do? Oh, sweetheart, it keeps my tea warm, she will tell me. Well, that's a good definition. First part tells you its conventional characteristics. Next part tells you its job, which is the meaning of it. So now, that's not enough. She has to prove it to me. We'll believe whatever people tell us. We don't have a question. We're very lazy. But we should prove it, okay? So she'll get her tea and she will pour it. And then she'll put the lid on and she'll put it away for a couple of hours and we'll come back and we'll take the lid off and it will still be hot. She just now proved that it is in fact, it is a flat bottom metal container, but we just proved its job. It did in fact hold my tea and keep it warm. But that's still not enough to prove that that is what it is conventionally. We have to check in the world, are there any other definitions of this phenomenon that are different from that? Then if there's not, we can all tick the box, shake hands. We can now proceed to describe and discuss the reality of a thermos. Now let's take the phenomenon called an I, me, person. Conventionally, that's the label that is suitable for us. I always forget the definition of a person. It's a very boring definition. But let's just assume we fit the definition of a person, you know. So now we have to, that's the conventional label. We're going to discuss the label of the person. So how does that phenomenon exist conventionally? And remember, this is the thinking we have to do to then prove to us, aha, it lacks an intrinsic nature. Emptiness, lack of intrinsic nature, absence of intrinsic nature, something's being self-existent, something's existing from its own size, something being inherent, something existing in its own nature, something being established from its own side. There are many, many, many synonyms for how, well, what we're trying to prove isn't true. Because Buddha is very simply telling us that thermos is not green, Robina. So that means I think it's green. He's telling me, Robina, you are not existing intrinsically. There is no inherent Robina there. You are not existing from your own side. The phenomenon called Robina lacks inherent existence. The phenomenon called Robina isn't existing from her own side. The phenomenon called Robina doesn't exist inherently. The phenomenon called Robina does not exist independently. These are all the synonyms. And so obviously he's telling me that because I must think that I do exist independently. I must think that I do exist from my own side. I must think that I do exist inherently. But whoever thought that? Whoever taught you that? Nobody. Because we don't even point it out in our science, and we don't even point it out in our psychology, because this mistake, Buddha says, is the most primordial, the most deep, the most powerful, the most instinctive mistake in the universe, in the minds of every single tiny sentient being, including the ants and the dogs and the monkeys and the best intelligent people, the most geniuses, and even the saints. That's what we have to uproot from the mind in order to get the hell out of samsara and stop suffering. So it's a very subtle mistake. That's why when we hear it, we're puzzled. He's telling us that we think, not just I, but everything has that nature. We think the lamp has an intrinsic nature. We think this computer has an intrinsic nature. We think that Buddha has an intrinsic nature. I mean, of course we didn't think, we thought that. We don't know we think that. That's why we're puzzled. So we obviously, if we think a mistake about something, we've got to unpack that mistake, don't we? You can't just go, oh, well, it's not really true, and you don't even know what it means. You're an idiot. So that you can't realize emptiness of intrinsic nature until you know what the hell intrinsic nature means. You can't realize that's not green if you don't even know what green means. So you've got to realize the mistake first. And then once you realize the mistake, you'll go, aha, now I realize that it lacks being green. So you don't go on, it's empty, it's empty, it's empty, oh, it's all empty, it's all empty. This is idiocy. You've got to squeeze your brain and think about how it does exist conventionally. And that proves to you, as Lama says in Mahamudra, the second you are precisely clear about exactly what inherent existence means, that second you will realize it's empty of that. So we've got to squeeze our brains, as Lama says. Okay. Let's look then into the thinking we need to do to disprove intrinsic existence. We've got to look at how things do exist conventionally, which argues directly with the mistake. So, first of all, though, which part of our mind makes this mistake? Each part of our mind does its own job. They're all very specific, right? So eye consciousness is what perceives color. Ear consciousness perceives sound. You know, anger sees a person as very ugly. Attachment sees a person as very delicious. Each of these states of mind has their own way of seeing things. Some are valid and some are not. So the part of our mind that underpins all those branch delusions is the root delusion, the root misconception, the root affliction, the term they use in Sanskrit and Tibetan, which is very arcane in English, you know, is called simply ignorance, plain ordinary word, ignorance, ma-rigpa. So now, simple ignorance is easy to fix. If we had simple ignorance, we could become a Buddha in a couple of years. I wouldn't be surprised. But it's like double trouble ignorance. So the ordinary ignorance is like this. You know, simply, if I say to you, what is that? I don't know. That's simple ignorance, isn't it? There's no other view in my mind. I simply don't know what it is. That's easy to fix. My mind is a blank. There's a space in my mind, and you say, Robina, it's called a thermos. And I go, oh, now I understand what it is. Now, if we had that kind of ignorance, we could become a Buddha, I'm sure, in a couple of years, because we're very clever. But we've got another level of ignorance. That's the trouble. And that level of ignorance is not only do I not know that it is a thermos, I think it's a toilet. Let's just say, okay? Okay, it could function as a toilet, a small one, but never, that's not the point here. I really got it wrong. I really believe it's a toilet. In fact, it could function, take the lid off, and it would be very good to hold a bit of pee, you know, no problem. So all the time you go to the kitchen and you get your nice cup down, your grandma's cup, and you think it's the toilet. You'll be upsetting everybody, won't you? You believe it's a toilet. You totally believe it's a toilet. You believe that's its job, that's its function, that's its definition. When you go to upset grandma, grandpa, you go to the shops and you say, where's, you know, you see the cups in the shop, you go pee in the cup. You've really got a mistake there. You're in trouble. So it's going to take you quite a while to unpack that mistake, because you don't realize it's simply called a cup and it's meant to bloody well hold tea, not your urine. So that's a mistake. So the thing is, simply not knowing what a cup is easy to fix. But to think it's something else, that's the problem. So you're running up into problems and dramas and suffering because you believe in something that doesn't exist. That's something that isn't true there. And this is a simple example because it could function as a toilet, but you've got a wrong view. So merely not knowing the truth that I'm interdependent, that's easy to fix. But the trouble is, because that's a conventional truth, but the trouble is ego grasping, the root delusion, ignorance, and ego grasping when it relates to the I. This root delusion not only doesn't know that I'm a dependent arising, but it believes the exact opposite, that I am intrinsic, that I am inherent, that I am independent. The object called I exists independently. The object called cup it exists independently. It has an inherent nature, an intrinsic nature. That's exactly opposite, diametrically opposite to interdependent, dependent arising. Dependent is opposite to independent, isn't it? Dependent and independent are complete opposites. So not only do I know the truth, not only do I not know the truth that I am a dependent phenomenon, not only do I not know the truth that I am a dependent phenomenon, I believe I'm independent. So of course we don't know we think this, do we? So we've got to investigate it. So not only do we not know the truth, we believe in a lie, and we've layered that lie on top of the truth. As Lama Zopa says, all the delusions do exactly this. All the delusions. The branch delusions and the root delusion. What they do, as Lama Zopa says, is they decorate on top of what is there, layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of characteristics that just don't exist there. And that's what's hard to see. So forget about ego grasping, the root delusion. Just look at attachment. You know, if I'm in love with George, we know that you're looking at George and I'm looking at George. We both agree it's George. We both know he's 6'10", whatever he is. He's 6 foot. How much are you? Every time I go, well, how tall are you? I can't hear you.
6'1", Venerable.
Only 6'1". I always thought he was 6'6". I'll tell you why. He's got this beautiful German, immaculately tailored 45 years old overcoat, isn't it? And every time whenever I be in New York, at least for one winter, it's perfect for me. It's down to the ground. I'm 5 feet tall, okay? So it's this beautiful coat. It's like brand new, this divine German, elegantly tailored coat. I'm just being ridiculous. I'm getting carried away now. And I'd wear this beautiful overcoat in winter in New York. It was so gorgeous. I'd always love to go to New York just for my special coat, George's long overcoat. Short for him, okay? Anyway, the point is, if I'm in love with George, you're sitting next to me, you can see George, you can agree he's got a bald head, he's tall, he's this, he's that, you know, he's blah, blah. You can tick all the boxes. But if I've got attachment in my mind, you and I, especially if you're his ex-boyfriend or his ex-girlfriend, whatever, you know, it's up to him. Let's say he's got an ex-girlfriend and you're my friend and we're standing there looking at George. We know we are seeing two completely different Georges. But we never join the dots. This is enough to prove emptiness to every one of us. That should blow our minds. We should sit there and go into samadhi and realize we've just realized emptiness. Where is the George that exists from his own side standing in front of us? There isn't one. And this is the point. All the delusion, you keep stripping away the lie of attachment, and you've got the lie of aversion because you're the ex-girlfriend. You strip away your lie of aversion, but that's not enough. We at least get some equilibrium. But now we have to strip away the lie that, for my mind, that underpins the attachment lie is the lie of ignorance that causes delicious George to appear to me existing out there from his own side as delicious George. The George you see is ugly George. So not only does aversion cause him to look ugly to you, but that your ego grasping, informing your anger, paints the picture of intrinsic ugly George existing over there from his own side, having nothing to do with your mind. And the George that I believe is there has nothing to do with my mind. This is how we see the universe, all believing our own fantasies. But we're believing in these fantasies for so long, we don't even realize that our mind is doing it. Because how does everything appear to us? Exactly. We believe it exists exactly the way my fantasies see. I never think for 1 second that I've made up a view of George. Not for 1 second. Because the view of grasping at things as intrinsic is so outrageous that it actually causes George to look delicious, as if deliciousness is coursing in his veins along with his blood. And you see disgusting, ugly George, as if ugliness and disgustingness is coursing in his blood, his veins along with his blood. That's how everything appears to us. So the attachment exaggerates the deliciousness, but the ego grasping informs that and makes him, or the ignorance informs the attachment and makes him look intrinsically in and of himself ugly. This is how and they're lying to us every second of the day. We're seeing the entire universe through the lenses of these different mistakes. This is Buddhist psychology. I mean, it's pretty brilliant. You've got to admit, not that I know that much. I think Buddha's pretty cool. So we've got to start unpacking our crazy minds. We do the work in high school, we control ourselves. In junior school, we control our body and speech. So I don't want to lunge onto George every minute and eat him for breakfast, or you don't lunge onto George and want to kill him. At least we can calm our body and speech down. Then we start to calm the mind down and get to the root, the branch delusions. And now we're dealing with the root delusion. Are we communicating, people? Good. So let's do some analysis to uproot the root delusion. There's so much analysis we have to do. So many ways you can argue with ego grasping, argue with ignorance. So we're going to use the object, not George. We're going to use our own I. George can use his own George. We can now use our I. So there's 3 levels of mistakes the Buddha points out that are arguing with the prevailing views at the time. The first one is that there's a permanent I, a soul. The Christians call it a soul. The Hindus call it an Atman, a self. I think the Greeks call it like an essence. And this is something we even feel in the West. We mightn't articulate it like this, but we all believe there's something intrinsic here that makes us I. We believe even there's an intrinsic I in here, some little special part, like a mini me in there that's like a puppeteer, isn't it? A bit like that. That's how we feel. Well, listen. So the next one is even more. It's slightly more subtle, and I'm sort of conflating these first 2 views. But the second one I find very tasty. So okay, listen to this one. The first one is we believe that there's an I that's independent of causes. When we start to realize karma, we realize that no, I am the fruit of past causes. And the more I think of the causes that produce me, what that does is loosen the grip of self-pity me. Lama Geshe calls ego grasping self-pity me, you know, poor little separate me. So now we go to the second one. And this is that everything that exists, there's I that exists, the cup that exists, the thermos that exists, the toilet that exists, the Buddha that exists interdependently in relation to its parts. And the more you search among those parts, you won't find any me there. Which leads to the subtlest one, which is that me is merely a name given to those parts. But let's do the middle one. It's very tasty. I likely to use the example of you go to IKEA and you buy a table. So we know very well, you know, you see the pretty picture of the table on the computer, or you see it in the shop, you get all excited. Then what you get a surprise, you get a big box with bits and pieces in it, don't you? But we know that, you know, all those bits and pieces are the parts that if you put them together will make up the table. We know that. We know it's a very good way to see about dependent arising. So you get all those parts, and you know perfectly well, the IKEA people have very kindly put into that box that you buy, that gets delivered, they put in the very precise number of parts, exactly one top, 4 legs, 27 screws. Each little, think of this, each little piece does its job in fulfilling the function of a table when you put them all together. These are very important words to hear. So now let's just pretend you buy a me. George goes and orders a George. I go and order a Robina. Alessia orders an Alessia. Afra orders an Afra. Think about this. And you go and you get it delivered, a box, you get it delivered. There's a George being delivered. So you know you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of parts because we're very much more complicated than a table. You got to have, so you got the first two lot, you got one category in that box called the parts of the mind, and you have another bunch of parts in that box called the parts of the body. We know that's what we're made of. As far as Buddha is concerned, we have parts of the body and we have parts of the mind. And you know perfectly well there must be, in fact, thousands of parts. To construct a me would be quite complicated. So many parts. Think about this. So now we're gradually putting those parts together. Gradually, the George is become manifest. You've got the head on, you've got the eyes in, you know, oh, it's like George now. Look at this, you know, you've got a George here. We're putting in the anger and the love and the kindness, all these bits of mind, which is obviously more subtle. But what we're doing is we get all the parts together. What we're hoping to find, what we're thinking we're going to have to find as we keep going, is another part in its own little box inside, a third category, and that part is the part that we think George won't exist until we find that bit and put it on and turn on the switch. And that part is called I, me, self. We believe there's going to be that part there. Where's the I? But, you know, we've got the eyes and the ears and the anger and the love. That's not enough. You've got to have an I. You've got to have a me in there. And now look at our language. I have an ear, I will say. When I say ear, I'm going to point to this. When I say I, not sure we point vaguely here. This is the analysis we have to do. Buddha's telling us, don't be silly, Robina. All those bits in that box, all the bits of the mind, working beautifully with all the bits of the body, is enough to have George to function. You don't need a special piece called an I. You don't need an extra special piece called a me. You don't need a mini me. You don't need a bit called a soul. You don't need a bit called an Atman. You don't need a bit called an essence. You don't need that. The parts of George's body and the parts of George's mind all work beautifully to function exactly as George. So, in other words, you won't find a piece. You won't find another piece called I. You will find an ear. You'll find a nose. You'll find the bit of anger. You'll find the bit of love. You'll find the bit of jealousy. You will find those bits. You'll find 5 fingers on the right hand. Each of those bits do exist in terms of looking for this I, in terms of its parts. You will find all those parts and you'll put them all together perfectly, the same as the table. But you don't need, not only did IKEA not make a mistake and not send you the special piece called I, you don't need one of them. Not only is there not a little I in there that's independent of the other parts, you don't need one. This is very shocking to hear. So another way of putting it. So first, let's look at how we talk, normal life, and how we feel. Look at how we feel. George insults me. Says, you got an ugly nose, Robina. I've told you to get your nose fixed. It's so gross. Because he's a mean boyfriend. And I'll be so upset. I'll be crying. George, how dare you insult me? He'll say, Robina, I didn't insult you, dear. I insulted your nose. We will laugh at him and think he's being mean. But that's an accurate statement. He didn't insult me, the piece that you think is in there somewhere, running the show. He insulted the nose. So now this is the point here. We'll do some more logic to show how, if there were, let's look at the consequences of if there were a separate part called I. That, as my friend Pende says, that's walking hand in hand with the nose and the ear and the anger and the love and the jealousy and all the other millions of parts, that's walking hand in hand with the other parts, which we think is existing. Our words express it, Let's look at the silly consequences of that. So this is the argument that they all talk about in the monasteries, the debate, one of the debates you do. If something does exist, it's going to be one thing. And if there's more than one, there's more than one. So there's either one or there's more than one. So what this means is this. I'll use my typical example and I'll say I have a thermos and a tissue. Well, so look at that statement there. I stated 3 nouns. One's a pronoun, okay? 3 phenomena. 3 phenomena. One phenomenon is called a tissue. One phenomenon is called a thermos. And the third phenomenon is called I, Robina. So if you heard that statement coming from this mouth, you would tick the box and go, yeah, she's not completely crazy. She is holding a tissue and a cup and there's an I. So that means there are 3 phenomena there. It's easy to point out. Now, the point is here, this is a simple example of pointing out 3 phenomena that are both separate from each other and independent. So listen to this. It's very simple. If my thermos breaks, my tissue still works to blow my nose. No problem. The tissue doesn't collapse. If, Robina drops dead, the thermos is fine. It's metal, so it can handle a drop. It will still function to keep the tea warm. And if the tissue is full of snot and you put it in the toilet and put it down, the Robina and the thermos are still untouched because there's no relationship. There's no dependence upon each other, and there's no relationship of any kind with each other in terms of their function. Now we'll say something more nuanced here. I have a nose and an ear. So that's also 3 nouns, isn't it? There are 3 nouns there, 3 phenomena, 3 nouns. I, nose, ear, 3 nouns. So if that's a true statement, even conventionally, without it, we have to point out, like we did before, 3 phenomena. So ear is easy to point out. Look at it. And nose. These are easy, and they do not have a relationship. Okay, in a bigger level, if they all both bleed to death and the whole of Robina dies, that's not the discussion here. An ear does not need a nose in order to hear things, and a nose, maybe some clever people who do eye, ear, nose medicine might say they do, but just keep it simple. The nose does not need an ear to do its job. So it's 2 phenomena that are both separate and independent, I would say. Now what about the third phenomenon, I? What we have to do, if this is a true statement, even conventionally, is point out the phenomenon that is the I, but that doesn't depend upon the ear, that doesn't depend upon the nose, that doesn't depend upon the chin, that doesn't depend upon the mind, because that's what we think. But just even this cursory analysis, you can hear there isn't one. How can there be? That's what we think the soul is. That's what we think the Atman is, and it's permanent and uncaused. And Buddha says no. And if there is, you have to find it. You have to find it, what it is, So the point is this. It is true that there is an I. This is where we get tricky now, but not the way we think. This is the trouble. We want to point it out like we want to point out an ear and a nose. A third piece. There's the I. There's the I. And it's kind of like it's a bit more, the I is more important than the nose and the ear, isn't it? Because it's like the boss, the owner. I have a hand. I have a nose. I have an ear. There's an I that owns them. Even more simple. My thermos has a base. There's 2 nouns there, right? 2 nouns. So let's look for the base, and let's look for the independent base, and let's look for the independent thermos. because there's two nouns there, thermos and base. So take the base away, and what you now have is a piece of round metal, isn't it? And what's over this side? What here is now is a metal tube. That's not a thermos. So what's a thermos? Thermos is the name we give to when the tube and the base are joined. But you won't find here any thermos because it's merely a name. This is the subtlest one. It's merely a name given to the combination of the parts. So here the same. So even in the parts one, you won't find a part called Robina. Now this is the point now, if you could find a third component called I, that is the owner of the nose and the owner of the ear, if you could find the piece called I, if you could, that would have to be separate and independent. So you think this way. In other words, when, if George, breaks my nose, when he punches me in the nose and my nose breaks and there's pain in my nose, if there is a separate I, think about it. Just like an ear, the ear is not feeling pain. The ear is going, oh, thank goodness, not me. I'm fine. Ear's all good. No blood coming out of my ear. Ear's happy. Thank you, ear. Now, if there is an I that's separate, the I will be watching and going, oh, thank God it's not me. Poor old nose got the trouble. The ear's okay and I'm okay. The self is okay and the ear's okay. No, we don't say that. We know I'm in pain. But the point is this, as Lama Zopa says, the I is not the base. The I, the name, is not the base. That's the biggest mistake we make. The I, this is not I, one mistake. And the other mistake is the I is different from the nose and from the ear. The I is different, but you can't separate them. So thermos and base are two separate nouns. The base, its definition is it prevents the tea from filling out. It prevents the tea from falling out of the thermos. The thermos in general holds the tea warm. That's two nouns and two definitions. They can't be the same. But you cannot find a thermos here. You can find the base, you can find the parts, you can find the lid, but you cannot find a thermos. But there is a thermos that does keep my tea warm. So the same with the I. There is an I, but not separate. Different, but not separate. Different, but not separate. Totally interdependently existing. You can't separate them, therefore they're interdependent, but different. The I is not the ear. The I is not the nose. The I is not the mind. This is what we have to put together. So any questions before? We've got some time. Any questions? These are all simple words, but because they're arguing with the instinctive assumptions we have, we can't hear them properly. Any questions?
Venerable Robina, there's a question from Matthew, please.
Who? Who's asking the question?
Manjumati? Ramesh?
Oh, yeah, Manjumati. Hello, darling. Talk to me.
I this bothered me a while ago, and then I gave up on it. So that I'm able to ask you today. So if there is no intrinsic I, and what I think is I is the sum of parts, then what is that we say is the next life?
Okay, good, Madhumati. It's not complicated, darling. It's not complicated. There are two parts of Madhumati. One is the mind and one is the body. Okay, can you take that as our agreement first? This is the Buddhist view. Yes. Okay, good. So then the fact is, if you've taken, this gross body of Madhumati, this gross body, we know that what death is when the body stops, it completely ceases and turns into kaka, turns into dust. But the consciousness, it happens to be the Buddha. For the Buddha, the consciousness is beginningless and endless. So your mind, your grosser consciousness ceases at death, coming along with the gross body, that ceases. Then you get to the subtle level of consciousness, and your subtle body, all the different, this is from the tantric view, they all cease to function. And your mind subsumes all the way to the very subtle consciousness, and your physical energy subsumes, all the gross to the subtle, subsumes to the very subtle wind energy, the prana. And it says in the Vajrayana that the very subtle wind energy is inextricably linked with your very subtle mind. You can never separate these. And these are the building blocks, depending on your karma, for the next body and mind. But so that is what continues, both the physical and the mental, the very subtle mind and the very subtle prana energy inextricably linked, having all the karmic causes, the karmic seeds on them, that's what continues. And you go to the new womb, and then you take a new shape and form. So you technically, from the tantric point of view, your body and your mind go from life to life, because the subtle wind energy is still physical, although it's inextricably linked to the very subtle mind. But traditionally in the sutra teaching, you'd say the mind carries on, bearing all the karmic imprints of everything Madhyamati has done and said, and all the past karmic imprints of the countless past lives of Madhyamati that haven't yet ripened. You're carrying these in your little kind of bank vault in your mind, and that is what continues to the next life. But that whole package is labeled I. In this life, it's Madhyamati I. In next life, it could be Joe or Fred I or Kangaroo I. So I is always the label you give to that basis, and the basis is the body and mind, subtle or gross. So conventionally speaking, the I continues into next life, and it turns into a new I based on karma. But I is the label that you give to that body and mind. And the point is, the fact is, with everything that we're pointing to, like when we went back to the discussion about there's no I in here among the body and the mind, then we sort of can conclude, oh, thank goodness, at least I've got a body and a mind. No, because you start searching for the body, that too is a mere label upon its parts. Well, that means I've got an ear. Oh, that's good. No, ear is a mere label upon its parts. Oh, I've got an earlobe. No, earlobe is a label upon its parts. Oh, I've got a half of an earlobe, and you keep going down to the atoms and the molecules, and every word you say, no, there's no molecule from its own side, because it's a label merely upon its parts. So everything that exists, no matter it's the billionth of a second, it's the billionth of a tiniest molecule, whatever you posit, there's a label, and that label is based upon a part.
Yeah, so the sum of parts is something.
No, sum of parts is also a mistake. Let's argue with that one. Let's argue with that one, Madhyamati. So the two mistakes we make is either there's a little intrinsic I that runs the show, or that all of me is I. Well, if there's something that's existing, there has to be one thing. And if there's more than one, there's more than one. So if we say, I am my body, that means body and I have to be one thing. But your body is made of parts. So then you say, well, my ear is my eye and my nose is my eye. So but then why would you bother saying, if your eye and your ear are the same, one thing, why would you say, I have an ear, I have a body, I have a mind? Because they're the same thing. You wouldn't bother. So it's just not a possibility. So it's neither the sum of the parts, nor is it a separate part. They're the two main arguments we have to do to prove the emptiness of the intrinsic I.
Okay.
Okay. In the sutra teachings, they talk about how the 4-point analysis. And the first point, this is the point, the first point of this 4-point analysis is we first have to establish what we think the intrinsic I is, because that's what ignorance is grasping at. Buddha's telling us there is no intrinsic I, but we have to first try and get an understanding of how we think it exists in order to then prove it doesn't exist, which seems really curious. The first step is to establish the object to be negated. And once we've done this, we've realized emptiness. This is the easiest one, the hardest one. The second one is there's only two options. We have to then prove that we have to disprove that I is separate from the parts, and we have to disprove that I is oneness with the parts. And once we've done this analysis, the conclusion will be emptiness.
Okay.
Do you understand?
Yes.
Okay, good. And why we have to do this analysis is because ego grasping is a concept that's been there for so long and so intrinsic and so deep and so primordial that we have to start to break it down slowly and get to see how it's alive. Another way they put it is, if something does exist somewhere, you'll find it with certainty. So use a simple example. And let's say, there's a whole table with electronic things on it, like 50 electronic things. And you've never heard of an iPad, let's say. And you're embarrassed to admit it. And I say to you, oh, Muddy, can you check on the dining room table among all those things? I left my iPad there. Now, if you don't know how to establish what an iPad is, you could look at that table for 1,000 years, couldn't you? Because you'd never know with certainty that there either is an iPad there or there isn't an iPad, because you don't even know what an iPad is. That makes sense, doesn't it? So you have to first establish, before you start searching, what you're searching for. Now, an iPad is an easy example because it can exist, but it's the same here. We have to establish how we think we cling to this intrinsic I, which demands an enormous amount of real subtle looking, which is why we have to have single point of concentration, because we don't have the subtlety in ordinary daily life to catch the I. And that's what Mahamudra is all about. You've got some concentration and you're watching out of the corner of your eye to observe the way the I appears to us. So when you go, so once you've established what an iPad is, you can go to that table and you'll search, and you'll do a definitive search, and you'll have two options. You will either find the iPad and give it to me, or you will say with certainty, there is no iPad there, Robina. But until you can identify an iPad, you will never have that certainty. So until we can identify how we think the intrinsic I exists, we cannot ever with certainty prove it doesn't. This is the point. It's kind of quite intricate work we have to do intellectually, experientially, in our daily life, throughout the day, all the time, and in meditation. You with me, people? Any more questions?
Yes, Venerable Robina. Wendy has a question. Please go ahead.
Yes, darling.
Hi, Robina. So I think I get the disproving that the I is separate, but I'm not getting that it's oneness.
Oneness with. Okay. So if something does exist, you have to point it out as being something separate, don't you?
Yeah.
So if you say, my body is Wendy. So if you say the body is Wendy, so I am my body, you'll say. You agree? You could say that, couldn't you? But I am my body, you'd say. Well, is that two nouns? Is that two nouns, Wendy?
Yes.
And how would you define Wendy? Wendy is the name we give to the combination of a body and mind, isn't it? Wendy is the label we give to that combination. So if Wendy is the label we give to the combination of body and mind, how can you at the same time say that Wendy equals body? Body, and that means there's only one thing. So why would you say I have a body? It's just foolish. It's like saying I have an eye. How idiotic. Or you say body has a body. There's only one thing you can point to. You can only point to one thing. If you can point to more than one, then you can't say they're the same. If you say I am my mind, well, if Wendy is the mind and mind is the Wendy, they're synonymous. There's only one thing. Then where does the body fit? It's just you can't have it this way. It's a general view. It is true, Wendy, when someone says, hello, who are you? You'll say, I'm Wendy. But if you're really being a good yogi, you would say, I am the person known as Wendy. But as one of my teachers, my philosophy teacher said, well, you don't walk around saying I'm the person known as Wendy. Just shut up and say you're Wendy and be done with it. But you don't believe in the lie that I am Wendy, that I am the person known as Wendy. That's the correct statement.
But what is the oneness that you're trying to define, that it's not this oneness?
What
you're
oneness?
trying to you said, I think I wrote it correctly, disprove that I is separate and oneness with the parts.
Yeah, that's right. We've got to both argue there's a separate I, a little I that walks around, bossing all the bits around, which is the I we tend to think one time, or this is me, I am me. Don't you insult me, I'll say to George when he insults me in general, or thinks you're ugly or you're horrible. That's what we all do all the time. I am angry. I am so ugly. We think the whole little lump is I, and we define ourselves by whichever prevailing thing at the time. But we're trying to prove if something existed, again, the point is if something exists, you have to point it out. And it has to be separate. It has to be independent. It has to be different. It has to be something different. So in the simple example that I used before, I have a tissue and a thermos. That's easy to point out 3 separate phenomena. You tick the boxes. I pointed out I said 3 and I pointed out 3. So it's more nuanced when I say I have a nose and an ear. That's not a totally wrong statement, but we over embellish the word I there. It is an ear, it is a nose, but we assume there's a third piece that owns the nose and the eye. Or then we think, well, it's just they're all I. So that's the one you're trying to talk about.
Okay, I see.
You understand? You see the point? It's just really using logic to argue with this misconception that we don't even know is there because it's so primordial. It's so taken as a given. It's so taken as a given, you know. That's the point. All right. What else? Any questions, people? Finish up. I want to end up with a story about Lama Zopa. I'm sure I've told it before, but I'm always liked it as a perfect story to end with. So the thing is, when we realize emptiness, this sounds so hilarious to us. And this is Lama Zopa's point. The story I'll tell proves it. As Lama Yeshe says in Mahamudra, when you've realized that there is, we haven't finished, and there's so much more to say, actually. God, I might have to go over a bit for a second. Let me say a bit more, okay? There's another whole discussion here. The use of the word emptiness is very confusing to us, okay? We've got to discuss this word and how it's used, okay? So everything that exists is itself a phenomenon, a thing. It doesn't mean a phenomenon, doesn't mean something physical. Anger exists, so that it's a phenomenon. Love exists in where? In my mind, so it's a phenomenon. A phenomenon doesn't have to, or an object doesn't have to be a thing that's physical. It's something that is existing. So, everything that exists, then, okay, so whatever can existing, it's something in the mind. The definition of an existent is that which can be cognized by mind. That's a definition. It's a very powerful, it's a meaning of what exists. If it can be defined, if it can be cognized by mind, it exists. It's the actual proving of something's existing. Mind is central in Buddhism. So if, just use a simple example again of my thermos, and you think it's green. Wendy's, you know, she's colorblind. Her eyes make this appear green to her. That's perfectly possible. We know about colorblind people. So all her life, she's just, whenever black appears, she sees green. So we can't bully her into seeing the truth. She probably knows it's wrong because enough people tell her that, no, it's not green, but she knows she makes a mistake. But it appears to her as green. So what are we going to do? We're going to fix her eyes, you know. We're going to fix her eyes. We have to fix her eyes to help her. So now this is what's going to happen. We'll now show her the black thermos again after her operation. So because, and this is the point, because she's still expecting green to come, she's programmed her mind, she's expecting green. Well, guess what? She's going to get a shock when black will appear to her. She'll get a shock. She'll say, oh my God. She said, oh my God, it's not green, she'll say, because she was expecting green. She was expecting green. And that's the key point here. The only person who would see that it's not green is a person who thought it was green before. If you think $5,000 is in your bank, Wendy, and you're convinced, because you're going to come on pilgrimage with me next year in October when we go on pilgrimage again, and you want your $5,000, and you're convinced there's $5,000 in your bank, and you look in the bank account and what you see in reality is zero, but you won't go, oh, no dollars in my bank. You'll go, oh my God, where's my precious $5,000? Now, if you ask me to look in the bank, I will never say, where's the $5,000? Because I didn't expect $5,000. So the absence of something, which is what we're talking about here, is always only cognized by a person who expected something else. Even if I just look in my cup and say, oh, my cup's empty, I was expecting tea. So if George leaves me after 40 years of being a devoted girlfriend and I find a note that he's run off with Fred, I tell you, for weeks, if not for the rest of my life, what I will notice in that house all the time is the absence of George. Think about this. It'll be painful to me. I'm always, because I'm expecting George. I'm yearning for George. I'm craving for George. I want the tea in my thermos. I want the $5,000 in my thermos, in my bank account. I want the George in my house. But if you come to visit me and you've never heard of George, you will never in a million years observe the emptiness of any George. Hear the point here. Emptiness is not something set in stone. It's the absence of something we thought was there. So the point is these absences I've just talked about are unhappy absences. I want tea, I want George, I want $5,000. But let's say you go to the doctor and they tell you got cancer and you'll be dead in 2 months. And you're just in the midst of your life, you're youthful, you're 30, you've got your divine husband, your divine house, your divine job, your divine children. You will be shattered. You'll be absolutely shattered, will you not? The suffering and pain. And then you go back to the doctor and she says, oh, we made a mistake, Robina. You don't have cancer at all. Now, that's a blissful absence. You thought you had cancer. You're devastated. And now you discover the absence of cancer and you are blissful and joyful. That's a good example of an absence. So as Lama Zopa says, the yogis in their subtle meditation who finally see for the first time, nakedly, directly, the absence of that I they thought for all their countless lives was there. They finally realized the I the intrinsic I that they thought was there never has been, isn't, and never could be. So this is a more radical absence because that phenomenon can never exist. $5,000 can, George can, T can, green can. There's simple examples. So the absence of something will only ever appear to somebody who thought something else. And that's what we're trying to see. We're trying to realize that that I that we've thought has been there since beginningless time, which is the cause of all our suffering, has never, doesn't, and could never exist. So Rinpoche says the greatest yogis are in complete and utter bliss when they discover that truth. So the absence of something, we mishear it as being nothingness. That's the biggest mistake we can make. Totally wrong. A simple example, okay? That bank account. Our minds at every moment are cognizing something very specific. So if I look in your bank account, Wendy, and I will tell you what I see, which is the truth, that there's a zero there. So the object of my mind is zero. I cognize $0. Do you agree with me? It's simple, isn't it? And that's an example of nihilism. There's no dollars. I tell you the truth, there's no dollars. What will the object that you cognize, the thing that will appear to your mind, will be the object called the emptiness of $5,000, the absence of $5,000, the lack of $5,000, and it'll be a shock to you. So $0 is not the same phenomenon as the absence of $5,000. So zero, so when we think of an I and you go through all the parts looking for the piece in the IKEA box, you're looking for that piece and you're having a panic attack where there's no I, I can't find an I in here. And we have a panic attack. So that finding no I in that box, if you leave it there, that's nihilism. But it's a good start. But don't leave it there. As His Holiness says, the I among the parts is not empty. The I is not lacking because you can't find it. Because you can't find an I. There will not be a piece in that IKEA box that is called I. But if you leave it there, that's nihilism. Oh, well, there's no I might as well kill myself. That's how we all think about it. No. As His Holiness says, the real premise, that's not the real premise. The real premise is that the I is a dependent arising. In other words, it's the name we give to all the parts. And as Lama Zopa says, when we've realized the absence of the intrinsic I, the independent I, it's as if it's so subtle, it's as if there's no I. No, he says, when you realize the emptiness of the I, it's as if there is no I. But then dependent arising, there is an I. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist. There's a really fine way of putting the two truths of emptiness and dependent arising together. That's the experience of the yogis. So the absence of something is a phenomenon that exists. It is true, my mind can cognize black color on this thermos. So that is proof that black does exist on this thermos. That's easy. That's an affirmative statement. Now let's pretend I've thought it was green. Let's pretend I thought it was green and you fix my eyes, and now I will look at this thermos and I will get a shock, and I'll first say, oh my God, it's not. When I say, oh my God, it's not green, that phenomenon that I cognize is called the absence of green. So where does black exist? On that thermos. Where does the absence of green exist? On that thermos. So that's why in the Heart Sutra, where Avalokitesvara says to Shariputra, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form is nothing other than emptiness, and emptiness is nothing other than form. All that means is this: where there is thermos, there form is emptiness. So black thermos, the presence of black thermos is the absence of green thermos. The emptiness of, so black thermos is emptiness of green thermos, and emptiness of green thermos is black thermos. Wherever there's black thermos, there's emptiness of green thermos, and whenever there is emptiness of green thermos, it's the same as saying black thermos. So emptiness and dependent arising are not separate, they point to the same thing. And you cannot have a thermos without black being on it. And equally for you, when you realize the absence of green on this thermos, the place where the absence of green exists is right there on that black thermos. It's not out there, oh, there's no green thermos. Oh, look, there's no green thermos. Don't be ridiculous. Absence of green exists exactly here on this black thermos. So emptiness of intrinsic Robina exists exactly on interdependent Robina. And wherever you find interdependent Robina, right there, you will find emptiness of independent Robina. You can't possibly separate them. Not possible. So that's why these two truths are the best way to not fall into the abyss of the great mistake, as Tsongkhapa says. You know, they're the king of logics to prove emptiness, because with the two truths, you're grounded. You can never fly off the handle into the weird two extremes, you know. So let me finish with Lama Zopa's story, okay? So Lama Zopa Rinpoche is a Sherpa, and he was identified as a little boy, maybe 6 or 7, maybe 8, as a reincarnation of the previous Sherpa yogi called Kunsang Yeshe. So this is way up above, you know, above Namche Bazaar, which is above Lukla, which is above Kathmandu, about 4,000 meters or something. I can't remember how many meters, 6,000 meters. I can't remember. I was up there 3 times. I can't remember. We do a trek every year, but of course we didn't do it this year. Our next one's booked for October next year. So you must come. Look it up, Laudo Trek. The place is called Laudo, L-A-W-U-D-O. And some people have been. Nina's been, other people have been, Jeff's been. Yeah, it's very special, very cheap. It's only $2,500. It's very cheap. 15 days we spend. So anyway, the point is, that's where Lama Zopa was born, and it's his place up there where in his cave, and now it's a retreat center, and his sister has been running it for like 60 years. She's amazing, you know, Annie Subton. And the brother runs it as well. So anyway, the point is, when he was a very little boy, the sister told me that she was about 6 when he was born, and he always acted very different. He acted like he'd always sit on a high box. He'd always sit separately from the other kids. He always sort of acted more seriously. When he played games, he always made mud pie dorjies and mud pie bells and mud pie torma cakes. And he would announce that all his benefactors were coming to the puja, and that would be the names of the benefactors of a previous life of the Laudo Lama. So every time Mummy would turn her back, they'd find little Zopa with his bare bottom crawling up this hill, which is where they know the cave is, you know. So from the time they'd drag him home, and from the time he could talk, you know, he'd be walking up that hill all the time. And she'd come home. He'd say, no, that is my home. So somehow he seemed to show indication that he might have been the Laudo Lama. So like these people, so they got the local abbot the local Lama to do divinations, and it came out that he was indeed the reincarnation of the Laudo Lama. Anyway, he was given away to a monastery when he was about 8, up in the mountains, about 8 hours up north, Rowaling. And he told the story years ago. He's told the story several times. And the story goes like this. That the previous life, he was Kunsang Yeshe, and he meditated in that cave for like the last 20 years of his life or something, you know. So anyway, and being a tantric yogi, they have complete control over their birth and over their death and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, the story goes, and he told the story, there's a big river up there, and these rivers are very treacherous, with these rickety bridges, you know. So he sees across the other side of the bridge. It's about 1952 or something. 1950, I can't remember. Whatever it was, he's about 8. So he saw these, you know, these weird looking people across the other side of the river, these pale face, pale eyes, straw colored hair. Sounds like Swedes, doesn't it? But white people, basically. And he'd never seen or met white people before, and he really wanted to meet them. So he got a bowl of potatoes, which is their, you know, their gifts, and he walked across this rickety bridge, and he fell in the water with his potatoes. Of course, they don't teach them swimming up there in these very treacherous waters, I tell you. So the way he told the story was, he said, the head came to the surface for air, not my head, the head. And he said he saw his manager freaking out, running up and down the bank, having a panic attack. Can't afford to lose little Rinpoches, Then he said, the thought occurred to me that the person known as the Laudo Lama is about to die. And then he said as a commentary, now, I didn't know anything about emptiness, which meant, of course, in that life, at 8 years old, he hadn't been taught about emptiness. I didn't know anything about emptiness, but there was no fear. Now, I think my commentary here is very interesting. First of all, if you aren't one of these tantric yogis, who have complete control over your mind, realize emptiness, you choose your rebirth, you don't lose any control, you know exactly what you're doing. And once you realize emptiness, you can't possibly lose it. You can never lose it until the cows come home, It's impossible. Once you've cut the root of ego grasping, you've cut the root of ego grasping. You can even lose bodhicitta. You can't lose emptiness. So because he had realized emptiness, meaning because there was in his own little mind when he was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, whatever, there was no sense of this neurotic, unhappy, fear-based, neurotic, angry, attached, jealous little I. There can't have been. There cannot have been. There cannot have been. So even when the I was attacked, even when he was threatened, and this is the thing for us, I think it was Mr. Darwin, wasn't it, who talked about instinct for survival. And we can see it in animals and humans. And when you're relaxed and comfortable, you look just relaxed and comfy. But when someone attacks you, look at those animals, when we're attacked, when a car nearly runs over us on the road, when George punched me in the nose, the little sense of I wakes up and freaks out and comes to the surface. And you panic, the heart beats, the eyes go wide, the blood races. We call that normal in our culture. And we think we need that in order to survive. In other words, if we think he didn't have instinct for survival, we think it's necessary to make him realize he's drowning. That fear is necessary to survive, for flight and fear, all that business. No, Buddha says, don't be ridiculous. Instinct for survival is a good name for ego grasping. So if the ego grasping is gone, you don't lose your common sense. He's not stupid. He knows he's drowning. And he does what he can. The head will still come to the surface for air, but he will be as calm and relaxed as if he still being intense, trying to survive, but his mind would not be disturbed. He'd be as if he's walking on the street, seeing things very clearly. You'd never be disturbed. You wouldn't have anxiety. You wouldn't have anger. You wouldn't have fear. You would not possibly have fear, because fear is the function of all delusions. So when you realize emptiness, fear has gone. This is hard to imagine, certainly not possible in our neuroscience or psychology. So he knew he was drowning. But he said, because his mind is naturally, even thought at the age of 8, the person known as the Laudo Lama, the head of the person now, not my head, not I am drowning, which is how we act. All based on the belief in a separate, intrinsic, independent, real, solid me. I like that story. Time to go home. 8 past. All right, Nina. All right, Talia. Good enough.
Venerable Robina, may I just say something really, really quickly? And then Nina will say something really, really quickly too. So thank you so much for agreeing to teach us throughout the last 7 weeks. And we're looking forward to continue in January. And thank you for Fernando for tirelessly translating, especially this session. It's I had a hard time wrapping my head around this. I don't know how you do the translation. So thank you very much to provide such a great service, and especially for Venerable Robina to really tirelessly and patiently guide us. And Nina is, and together with a few others, they were the very beginning members of our study group, and Nina will say a few words, please.
Thank you, Talia. Venerable Robina, I think I'm speaking in the name of Fernando, in the name of George, in the name of Wendy and Madhu and Talia and all the people sitting here and all the other 40 plus people who are listening to your teachings in the last few months. When I say, paraphrase your own, say that your teachings are pretty cool. And jokes aside, we wanted to thank you for bringing those precious teachings, very profound teachings, in a way that even my mind could follow a little bit, at least, closer to us, and even more for turning the mirror straight back onto us and helping us to reflect and go deeper inside and relate the teachings to our own life, to our own minds, and maybe find one, even if we don't understand it all, but maybe find one little thing that will help us to change a little bit, to maybe make the next little step to becoming that amazing person, to becoming a bodhisattva, and someday becoming a Buddha. And since now is a good time for New Year's resolutions, I hope that we don't only find or didn't use this time to find a way to change for ourselves, but also for others, but also we'll make that step in the maybe already today and maybe in the next year. So that for that precious gift that you gave us all, we wanted to thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Pleasure. It's a dependent arising. I always have to thank you people for coming, because you imagine how silly I'd be talking to myself. So thank you for giving me an excuse to talk. We'll do our job together. Okay?
Please keep coming. We'll always show up.
Thank you, people.
I hope that not just virtually, eventually there will be a way to also meet in person, but at least, like I said, there is hope. So virtually, Venerable Robina will be back in New Year, teachings on Thursdays, starting in January, giving us a whole overview of the path. And everybody is really cordially invited to join these teachings and to join us. I think it's somehow a magical way the Zoom makes us all feel like we are one family, like we are Sangha, like we can help each other and we can support each other. And it makes it much more special that we're not alone here in the center, but have everybody from around the world to join us. So please keep joining.
Thank you, Jeff. Everybody. Thank you, Talia and George and everybody there, and Yuval and Fernando, all the people, all you kind human beings. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Should we do our little prayer, shall we?
Yes.
No, I'd rather do it in English so we can hear the words. Okay, then I'll sing them in quickly in Tibetan at the end. So the first one is the dedication. What it means is this. It's an odd idea for us. What it means is, in the beginning, we decided we're going to listen to these teachings. Why? So we could develop our own amazing potential and eventually, become fully developed. And why? Because we can benefit others. That was our reason. So that informed our hearing the teachings. And now at the end, we've done that job of sowing all these marvelous seeds. So now we think, when all these seeds do ripen as my perfection as a Buddha, what's that for? For sentient beings. That's all dedication means. You're remembering at the beginning you're doing it for sentient beings, and you remember at the end that the result will come, you give it all away to others. That's how you think. The first one is dedicate. So we think like that. All these seeds we planted by listening. No seeds go astray. No thoughts go astray. It's all in there. So may we nourish these seeds from this moment forward by continuing to practice, developing our own amazing potential step by step and delighting in that, so we can be a benefit to others. And the second one is this marvelous aspiration of bodhicitta, which is the culmination of love and compassion, an outrageous kind of paradigm shift in the mind with which we can only see others. I mean, such an enormous mind. We have to imagine, we imagine we will be like that one day. It's hard to have that, but we imagine that. So may that bodhicitta grow and grow in the hearts of all. Okay, everybody. And may our lamas all live long. Lamas Opus, Holiness, Dalai Lama, all our teachers, may they live a long, long life. We all need them badly. Chang Trup Sem Chog Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Yu Ching, Ke Panyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gong Ne Gong Du Baba Shog, Gewa Di Inu Du Dag Lama Sange Drugyo Ne, Drowa Chikyang Malupa, De Sala Gopa Shog. Okay. Much love and goodbye, everybody. Thank you, precious ones. Thank you so much. I'll go now. Okay. Thank you, darling. All of you.
Thank you, Venerable Robina.
Thank you very much, Robina.
Thank you so much, Robina.